Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 554. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about communism and castles, amber, old towns, and solidarity as we go to Gdansk, Poland.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. I'm back from Israel, had a great trip, and we'll be hearing more about that in an upcoming episode of the Amateur Traveler. I believe that Gary Arndt will come on, and we'll be talking about some of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites and National Parks of Israel. But first, let's talk about Gdansk. I'd like to welcome Roma and Russell from roamingrequired.com, who have come to talk to us about Gdansk, Poland. Roma and Russell, welcome to the show.
Hello, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having us.
Well, and as you can tell from the accent, Roma and Russell are not Polish. If you can't tell, you'll know for sure by the end of the show. So what's your connection to Gdansk, first of all?
Actually, so it was in last year, so 2016, we started to explore Poland. We currently live in London and developed a love for Poland as a whole and particularly enjoyed our trip to Gdansk. So we want to share that with everybody.
Excellent. And it's a place that I have been through, but I parked a cruise ship there. Well, we let the captain do that and then went off to someplace else. But we have tried to do an episode on Gdansk twice unsuccessfully. So third time's the charm. Why should someone go to Gdansk, Poland?
Gdansk is quite unique compared to other cities in Poland. So I'm not sure if your listeners are aware, Gdansk was a member of the Hanseatic League. Mm-hmm. So that made it a significant trading port. So in terms of architecture, it's quite different to the rest of Poland. So some things you would see in Gdansk, you may not see anywhere else.
Well, and that also makes it a more Germanic city in terms of its origin. And it used to be, in fact, East Prussia. So a very different city in terms of from some of the areas around there. Excellent. And what would you recommend for, say, a one-week itinerary in Gdansk?
Okay, so for a one-week itinerary, The first thing you would want to do is familiarize yourself with the old town,
Mm-hmm.
cobblestone streets, some really interesting, colorful architecture. So that would be day one. Day two, I would totally recommend you head to the Solidarity Museum, which is just a little bit outside town, but well worth the walk. Day three, go back to the old town, familiarize yourself with the gates, the Long Market, Neptune's Fountain, the town hall. Day four, maybe look at the Amber Museum and the Gdansk Crane,
Mm-hmm.
St. Mary's, which is a large brick church.
Yeah. Third largest brick church in the world, which is really incredible to visit.
And day trips outside Gdansk. So you could be looking at Sopot, which is a commuter train just outside of Gdansk, or Western Platte, a historic site just outside the city.
So let's go back and do that in a little more detail. You started us in the historic center of the city.
So in the old town, it's comprised of several medieval-style streets, most of which were reconstructed after the Second World War because Gdansk suffered quite a significant amount of damage. But it's still remarkably authentic when you wander around. If you didn't know it was reconstructed, I don't think you would spot it. So there's a Long Market Street that is the first place that you should head to. There's a town hall that is quite grand and in the middle of the Long Market, so you can't miss it, basically. So you should definitely go there and have a look. I think it's now a museum talking about the city of Gdansk and the area, so it's well worth a visit.
And we say it's authentic. It looks like what?
So the Long Market Street is, I think it's only 500 meters long, so that's actually not that long, but that's the name of it. You've got cobblestone streets and then tall, narrow buildings that are of various bright colors. At each end of the Long Market, you've got what they call gates, but they're not gates like doors. They're sort of medieval style gates, imposing buildings at either end, which were fortress entrance and exit points. At one end, one of the gates was meant to be a palace for the Queen, King, but it was never actually used by them. They said it was too damp and musty.
Well, and the interesting thing is, with these Hanseatic cities, and Gdansk being one of these, if you're looking at this city and then you're looking at, say, Lübeck in Germany or Bergen in Norway or even Amsterdam, there's a striking resemblance because these were all trading cities. So a lot of the ideas flowed in terms of architectural ideas between these various cities back in the Middle Ages.
Right.
Excellent. So we went to the church.
A visit to St. Mary's Church. It's the third largest brick church in the entire world. You can walk through the entrance and then the whole church just opens out in front of you. Inside it's whitewashed, so all the walls are really white and it looks a bit plain at first, but then as you pay the very small nomination to enter, I think the entry fee is like 3 zloty or something, which is very minimal. So you go through and then it opens out. It's got little chapels all tucked in around the sides of the church. But the main seating area, I think the nave, you're sitting under this extremely high ceiling that just keeps going forever and ever. And you think, how many people can fit in here? And do people really come? But apparently they do. And the church can fit 25,000 people in one sitting. They've got priceless works of art all around the walls. So it actually is quite dramatic when you see these large paintings of like the Last Supper or the Rapture on these large white walls with huge windows that let all this natural light in. And it's initially quite dull, but then you let it seep into you and it takes control and you just think, wow, this place is amazing.
Cool.
Inside St. Mary's Church is a set of stairs that you can pay. I think it's like €1 or a couple of zloty to pay and climb the 410 stairs, I think it is, to the top of the church tower. And from there, you get great views over the old town, over the Motla River, which is the main river that runs through Gdansk. And it's well worth it. If you've got the energy, then I can highly recommend you climb to the top for the great views. Obviously, on the better days, you would see more.
Okay.
So one of the main reasons to visit Gdansk is visiting the European Solidarity Center. Now, this one, it has become my favorite museum ever. So this museum was opened in August 2014, which was the 25th anniversary of Poland regaining its freedom and 34th anniversary of the signing of the Gdansk Agreement. And the museum will focus on the solidarity movement. So We ended up spending almost the entire day there. The only reason we left is because we were asked to leave by security.
You were asked to leave because they were closing, not because of your
Yes,
behavior.
yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
Important clarification there.
Because it was created in 2014, it is a modern museum. There's 5 floors. It embraces technology as well. So a lot of the exhibitions that you'll see, it'll cover the lifespan of the Solidarity movement.
When you say a movement, this was a labor union in a country that theoretically was run by labor and therefore shouldn't need them. But of course, did. So that was one of the whole things when first we saw, for those of us who are old enough to remember when this happened, it was one of the things that was incongruous about there are these great marches and this terrible strike going on in Gdansk that, of course, later on completely is the first domino that leads to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. But it starts in this place right here, and I assume the museum is by the shipyards.
Yes, it is. As you approach the entrance to the museum, and you can spot the museum from quite a distance away because it has a really unique design. It has rust-colored metalwork panels, and the design of the museum is supposed to symbolize the hull of a ship as well. So as you enter the entrance, you'll actually walk past the shipyards where the strike took place.
How much had you known about the history of Solidarity? You guys are younger than me. You didn't live through this as much as we did on the news. How much had you known about the history of Solidarity before you went to the museum?
To be very honest, Chris, nothing.
It's fair enough.
We didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about Solidarity movement.
And I'm going to regret this. How old were you when the Berlin Wall came down?
Very, very young, school
Had you
age.
been born? Okay, all right. I know my daughter
we were in school.
Yeah, okay. My daughter was born that year, too. So for a whole generation of people who are younger, much younger than me, this is all something you'd learn in history books instead of on the nightly news. And so I think you're right that this has got to be fascinating to be exposed to this for the first time because it's an amazing history.
Look, I think it's worthwhile noting that we're Australian. So, like, the fall of the Berlin Wall was on the news, but it didn't make the news reports at school in the assemblies. We knew about it, but we were so far removed that we didn't really understand what impact that meant or how widespread the Soviet Union was or what the Cold War really meant. We just don't really understand any of that. So by moving to the UK and traveling a lot further, like we've gone a lot through Eastern Europe, former Soviet states, to really understand what that means. And so our first experience of that was at the Solidarity Museum, and I think that's why it's so important to us.
And I would suggest that if you really like this museum here, there's a couple of the things that I would recommend kind of in that theme as you're traveling around in that wider area. I would recommend the Museum of Communism in Prague, which talks about this history, but also talks about normal life behind the Iron Curtain. And then also I'd recommend the Checkpoint Charlie Museum, for instance, in Berlin. So this is one that I have not been to, but would really like to. Excellent. Where to next?
I think it's worthwhile noting that outside the Solidarity Museum is 3 crosses. I think they're about 40 meters high, and they're bound together with what looks to be rope that you would see from the shipyards. And the crosses represent the Solidarity movement. And it's a tribute to the protesters and how many people died and the change that happened because of the movement as a whole. But you can see the same monument in Poznan, which is another city in Poland where the first movement started. So everything that happened in Gdansk happened just after it happened in Poznan.
And Poznan, I think, was coal miners, if I am remembering correctly.
56 in Poznan, and then it kicked off in Gdansk, and then again in 80, when actually things really happened. So people were looking for food when they're in Gdansk. There's a few different options, but I would recommend that you try some local cuisine if you can. My all-time favorite is pierogi, which are, you can get 2 types basically. They're steamed dumplings, or you can get them as a baked dumpling. The majority of the pierogi you will get in Gdansk is steamed, but it's the filling. So they're kind of like gyoza or Asian steamed dumplings with different fillings. So you can get pork, like minced pork, or cabbage and mushrooms. Cheese is really popular. You can even get sweet varieties with cherries or strawberries. I was more a fan of the minced pork as opposed to the sweet variety, which seemed a bit out there for me. But Polish cuisine is predominantly pork, potato, rye bread. They have a soup, a rye sour soup, żurek, I think is the way you pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
There are still a few communist era canteen style dining places. There's one in the middle of Gdansk, which I think is worth a visit. You have to be a bit brave because the menu is not in English. And when I was there, the staff didn't speak any English either. So it's a little bit of pointing and guessing, but you take a tray and slide it along the counter and point at what you want. And then the lady behind there will just put it on a plate and then you pay at the end. So it's almost like a school canteen. So it's really cheap. It's one of the cheapest places you can eat. It's just opposite the Neptune Fountain on Long Market in Gdansk. So
well, and one of the advantages of a cafeteria or someplace like that when you don't understand the language is you can just point.
Yeah.
You could probably figure out if that's something I'm interested in eating or not. So excellent. Oh, by the way, and I was wrong about Poznan. That was just factory workers. It wasn't coal miners. I was thinking of a different strike.
They do like to strike a bit.
Well, they were striking for things like bread. Let's just be honest here that there were some difficult working conditions and some difficult problems with the economy that they were striking against.
And rightly so. Yeah, absolutely. So breakfast styles in Gdansk, you'll encounter like a standard continental style breakfast that you would get just about anywhere in Europe. Bread, salami meats, cheese, maybe some cereal, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, lunch is a larger meal. So you'd be looking for anywhere between 1 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon for a lunch. And that's a reasonably steady, solid meal that you would have. And then dinner is like a light supper. Along the waterfront in Gdansk, you've got plenty of restaurants. Majority of them will have English menus because that's a very tourist-heavy traffic area. Mm-hmm. But don't be afraid to try somewhere that doesn't have an English menu. I mean, what's the worst you can get? They brew their own beer in Gdansk, so there's a local microbrewery on the other side of the Motla River. So it's just opposite the Gdansk Crane, actually. So,
mm-hmm. And you mentioned the Gdansk Crane, and I suspect that people probably have the wrong mental image in their head when we say the Gdansk Crane. They're picturing something that looks like it would belong over at the shipyards by the Solidarity Museum, but that's not what you're talking about.
No. So this is it's on the side of the river mm-hmm. amongst lines and lines of restaurants facing the riverfront, and it's built into the building, and it's large wheels.
And it's medieval.
It is medieval. So it's a medieval crane from, I think it's like the 1360s, but I think it's been rebuilt. I mean, there was a lot of fires and things were made of wood, so they would burn quite easily. Mm-hmm. And you have 2 large wooden wheels that they used to power by men on foot. So the men, like mice on a wheel, would mm-hmm. stand in the middle and would walk the wheel. And they would use that as a lifting mechanism to raise cargo and things from ships that were docking in from the merchants that were bringing produce into Gdansk as a trading port.
And one of the reasons you're using this as a landmark is this is probably one of the biggest sites in the old town, especially the old port.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can't miss it. I don't think it's obviously a crane. If you
I know what you mean. Yeah,
go
okay.
inside, you can see it. But from the water or even from the restaurants that are along there, it just looks like something that's jutting out from a large row of medieval-looking buildings and mm-hmm, restaurants mm-hmm. on the main thoroughfare. So you can't miss it. And it is a museum, so you can go inside. You can climb the stairs and see how it fully functions. You can't obviously walk on the wheels anymore. They don't allow that. But
well, it sounds like, especially something for nerds like me who like to know how things work, that sounds like it'd be fascinating.
So once you've found something to eat, you're going to want something to wash it down with. So Polish beer, there's different varieties you can have. Lech, which is named after the president. Yeah. So that's a locally brewed beer. Or Żywiec is a popular Polish beer as well, which you can get just about anywhere. Beer is really cheap. Vodka is also a really popular beverage. It's not uncommon to get beer and a shot of vodka at the same time. You usually drink it straight. It's usually 50 ml in a shot glass, which is actually quite a lot. And they have a type of vodka. It's called bison vodka or Zabroka, which is bison grass vodka. which is a very Polish thing. So if you get the opportunity to try it, then definitely try it.
Okay, that's just the brand. It's not made from bison, I'm assuming.
In the eastern part of Poland, where it borders
Belarus.
So on that border, you've got wild bison that roam through the forest, and so amazing. There's a large national park on that border that has free roaming bison that you can. It's a photographer's dream, Chris. I really wanted to go, and obviously the bison eat the grass, and somehow they have modified the flavor to infuse the vodka with the same flavors. So it's known as bison grass. The vodka bottle has a picture of a bison on it, and that's where the name comes from.
I'm glad I asked, because that is not how the explanation that I expected. Excellent. Other sites to see then.
So another place that I'd recommend visiting would be Westerplatte. It was the scene of a German attack, which started the onset of World War II. So you can still visit. You can head south from the center of Gdansk, and then actually walk along the river and actually see where the first attack took place.
Okay. The one thing that people may not understand is that at the beginning of World War II, Gdansk was the free city of Danzig, which was part of Germany. And so the reason why here well into Poland, you're talking about one of the first attacks, is they were attacking from Gdansk into the rest of Poland.
I do know that Nazi Germany did use the shipyards in Gdansk to build warships, and they used the Poles as forced labor there. So it is perhaps worthwhile that if anybody has time just to go for a bit of a stroll. Obviously, the shipyards are still in use. They're not to the same strength or degree that they used to be, but it is well worth a trip just to go and have a look at how large the shipyards are and get an idea of what a significant military port that would have been for them to capture at that time.
Well, and it's not so much capture. Remember, this started as Germany. One of the things that's confusing about this region is, remember, Poland has gone away twice completely from the map after it was created originally. And when you're standing here, you're also standing in what became Prussia, which later on merged with the rest of Germany and became Germany. So this used to be Poland, but this also used to be Germany. So you mentioned Poznan, for instance, and my family, my German portion of my family, came from Poznan in the 1850s, and they were German. And Poznan was Germany. Poznan was Prussia. And so this, when we talk about this being Poland and we talk about the German part here, it's not like it was one or the other. It was kind of both. So Prussia really got its start in the Malbork Castle, which is right near Gdansk. And I mentioned that I had gone into Gdansk, but then hadn't seen it. I had gone out to this UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is a good day trip from here, which you mentioned the third largest brick church. Malbork is the largest brick castle in the world, and it's a stunning place to go, but it's also the beginning of Prussia. This is an area that was ruled by the Teutonic Knights, who came in to fight the Slavs, and so it has this rather complicated history. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do a show about Gdansk. It's a fascinating place, not just the Solidarity history, but this complicated history that goes before that, including all the way back to the Hanseatic League.
Yeah, that's right. So Malbork Castle is 30 k's from Gdansk. So did you go by train?
I went by bus. I was there on a cruise ship excursion. So
yeah, so you were right. It was built by the Teutonic Knights, and they used that as their headquarters for 150 years.
At some point, one of the heads of the Teutonic Knights, and the Teutonic Knights were monk soldiers, wills the castle and all of the lands of the Teutonic Knights to his nephew that becomes then Prussia.
It's really complicated history, that one.
It is complicated history, but a fascinating place and fascinating history in this area. Other sites to see?
I think if you're visiting Gdansk in spring, summer, or early autumn, it might be worthwhile jumping on a commuter train and heading north along the coast to a place called Sopot. So it's S-O-P-O-T. I've been in summer, and it was a little chilly, but it can be, on the right day, it can be lovely. It's a seaside resort. It's full of nightclubs. So if anyone's looking to go out partying, then that is definitely the place to go. It has Europe's longest wooden pier that juts out into the Gulf of Gdansk, which becomes the Baltic Sea. So it's 515 meters long. So that's something unique to the area. The rest of Sopot is kind of built on a slope with lots of interesting architecture. It's a really good day out. If you're in Gdansk for a week, then you've definitely got time to go to Sopot. If you're in Gdansk for 2 days, then probably give Sopot a miss unless you really want to go out and go night clubbing or are desperate for a trip to the beach.
Yeah, I'm guessing in terms of itineraries, 2 days, 1 day in the old town, 1 day or at least half a day at the Solidarity Museum, and then third day you'd add in what?
Well, I think the old town is large enough that you end up wandering around for a couple of days.
Okay.
You sort of familiarize yourself with, because there's a few key streets. Like there's also an amber museum, which might be worthwhile popping into. So that will take quite a few hours. If you're in the old town, you'll spend probably at least a day through the Long Market and then Long Street. And they do have mini museums, if you like, along the way. You do need to dodge the beggars asking for money, but also like, oh, I have this amazing restaurant, come here.
Okay.
And like shove menus in your face.
In terms of what do you call the guy outside the restaurant? In Greek, we call that the kalamaki, or the mouth, basically, the person who's standing outside saying, come, I have the great restaurant, look at my wonderful menu. But I don't know, I don't know a word for it in English. So, and you mentioned amber.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten the connection to amber in this area, but that was a very traditional, I want to say jewel, but we're talking about ancient resin, so I don't know what the right term would be, something of great value.
And so they know it as Baltic gold or Baltic amber, if you like. So it's really popular in the Baltic regions. So you'd be looking, it's not just specific to Gdansk or Poland even, you'd be looking at the other Baltic nations. But you will see a lot of street sellers selling amber. There is some debate as to whether it's all legit.
Some of that might be plastic, you're saying.
So it's really popular. They do have an amber museum which talks about the history of it. Some 100,000 years old examples of amber that you can have a look at, and the different variation colors that it comes in. Obviously, I think you can shape it into just about anything you want. So if you do want to buy something that's quite unique to the area, to a point at least, amber would be something to consider buying, as a ring or as earrings, necklaces. It's popular form of jewelry. I think you might want to just make sure that you're buying it from a reputed seller and not just some stall on the street that could be a cheap knockoff from somewhere else that's made of plastic.
What surprised you about Gdansk?
I think the biggest surprise is that we didn't know what to expect. I think before going, we didn't know about its history. We didn't know what it had to offer. The biggest thing for us was experiencing everything for the first time and really being able to walk away with a much greater appreciation for the history of the region and the history of Poland. And it became a city that we would quite happily talk about to anyone and everyone, because it was really fascinating for us.
I love those cities that become your favorite and you didn't have any idea going in that they were going to be.
Absolutely.
What do the guidebooks recommend that wouldn't be on your top of your recommendation list?
So on Long Market, there is I mentioned previously that there was a few museums along Long Market that you can go inside of. There's one called Up Hagen's House.
Okay.
It is a merchant house. It was a museum in the early 1900s, and then it was destroyed in the war and then rebuilt. And it has been rebuilt as an example of how Gdansk locals lived in the city.
I assume it's a merchant's house from the Hanseatic League?
Yeah, that would be the best way of describing it. Okay. Yeah. I found it a bit dull. It's all nice and very pleasant, but it didn't grab me. It's in all the guidebooks and anyone would tell you to go there, but we left and thought, I wouldn't go back.
Well, to be fair, you might have found life as a Hanseatic merchant also dull because you had to swear to chastity and I believe also abstinence in terms of drink while you were working, basically for this period of time that you were there. So it was a rather austere, rather German, let's just say, lifestyle. And I'm half German when I say that. But very different, not a Polish kind of lifestyle. And so it was very much about this is your chance to make your fortune kind of lifestyle. So I would expect it to be a little Spartan, for one thing.
Spartan would probably be the best word, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. Anything else before we get to the last 4 questions that people should know before they go to Gdansk?
I think you should take your walking shoes. Skip the high heels, ladies. Take some flat, solid shoes. Those cobblestones can become quite rough underfoot, and you need some sturdy footwear to get by. Otherwise, you'll spend all day just trying to sort of dodge the gaps in the cobblestones.
Yes, anytime you hear someone say a lovely medieval city, think lovely and bring sensible shoes. Mm-hmm. Excellent. You're standing in the prettiest spot in all of Gdansk. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I think you'd be standing in the Long Market, just near the Green Gate, where it meets the Motla River, and you'd just be taking in the entire scene. The waves lapping up against the shore, you've got large ship sitting in the port, and the dramatic Green Gate in front of you.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Gdansk.
Walking along the waterfront and admiring the large dramatic cranes.
One thing that struck you as funny.
Just about everywhere you go in Gdansk, you'll stumble across so many people are bilingual. You don't really struggle to speak English. If you don't speak any Polish, then that's okay. And you can get by quite easily in just about most restaurants and most beer houses without any trouble. And you think, wow, this is great.
Okay. Finish this thought. You really know you're in Gdansk when
you're sitting having pierogi with a river view. Because you can't do that in many places.
That sounds pretty good. Love me a good pierogi. And if you had to summarize Gdansk in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Historic, surprising, and affordable.
Excellent. Our guests again have been Roma and Russell from roamingrequired.com. Do you guys have a great post on Gdansk on roamingrequired.com?
We've got a couple of posts on Gdansk which might be of interest. One specifically on the Solidarity Museum, and the other one is a Cliff's Notes version to the old town of Gdansk.
And just so people know, if you're looking at Amateur Traveler in your podcast player, if you look at the lyrics, you'll see the links for all of the things we talk about. Thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your love for Gdansk, a place that I have almost been to and really, really want to get back to.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much.
In news of the community, I heard from Miroslav, who was looking for gifts with the Amateur Traveler logo. This is a question I haven't gotten in many years, and so I haven't talked about it for a while. There is actually an Amateur Traveler store. I have a Cafe Press store that's been up for over a decade now, probably at this point, that includes some things with the Amateur Traveler logo. If anybody's interested, you can go to chris2x.com/store. That will redirect you to the right place, and then just click in on the Amateur Traveler logo. I heard from Frank, who commented on the episode we did last week on the Kenai Peninsula. And Frank wrote and said, I've been a steady listener of your podcast for a few months now, and I find it to be both entertaining and an excellent resource. I found the podcast premiere segments on DTNS. I just finished listening to number 553 about Alaska and the Kenai. It brought back some great memories from when I drove from Connecticut to Alaska and back in my Mini Cooper back in 2009. I wish I had heard this podcast back then, as it would have given me much more to check out while I was out there. Keep up the great work. And I wanted to mention Frank's comment because he mentioned something about DTNS, that is the Daily Tech News Show. I do a Tech and Travel Minute about once a week for the Daily Tech News Show, which is a great tech show and helps me promote the show. It happens to be a show that I really like, so if you're interested in technology, you might look up the Daily Tech News Show with Tom Merritt. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram as Chris2X, or better yet, join the mailing list. And thanks so much for listening.